hasn't been easy, but the best advice I can give you guys is to try to do something that makes you uncomfortable and push through the discomfort and push through the awkwardness and just do it anyway. And then be proud of yourself when you do it. And then when you don't, when it fails, still be proud of yourself because you at least tried. And again, disclaimer, I am not a mental health professional, but I have suffered from social anxiety for as long as I can remember. I also have ADHD, depression, and cerebral palsy, and a bunch of other issues. But I'm going to try to make this video as practical as possible, detailing some of the things that have helped me over the years, kind of mitigate some of my social anxiety symptoms. I'm not going to say that it's been cured because it hasn't. I still struggle, but it's not anywhere nearly as bad as it was in the past. And so I'm going to go through some of the things that have helped. And number one is just practice self-compassion and remember that as we go along. If you try some of these steps and you find that you weren't able to accomplish them, you weren't able to do this, don't beat yourself up about it. Just the fact that you're watching this video and looking for help and trying is commendable. So here we go. Okay, so for starters, one of the things that helped me that I didn't start doing until I was in community college, and it sounds kind of counterintuitive because if you have social anxiety, right, you probably dread this. So like when the professor goes around or the teacher goes around and asks you to talk about yourself, state a fun fact about yourself, or go around and introduce yourself kind of thing, is being the first one to volunteer to talk. And there's a couple of reasons why I have found that helped me was because I find that the longer I wait, to be called on, the more my anxiety builds up. And the first time it was really, really difficult to do this, to raise my hand, to volunteer, to be the first one to say anything. And one of my side effects that I've talked about is I blush, right? So I would turn really, really red from the neck up. Because sometimes when I talk to people, that's just one of the side effects of my social anxiety. It's just I blush uncontrollably and I can't help it, and it's really annoying. And just kind of accepting that sometimes when I talk to people, I'm gonna look like a tomato, and being okay with that has actually lessened the blushing. So the blushing doesn't happen as often anymore when I talk to people, and I think accepting that it's gonna happen and being okay with that actually mitigates some of those physical symptoms. So being the first one to volunteer, this helps me because it lessens the anxiety that builds up from me just having to wait to be called on. I feel like I give myself a certain amount of power over a situation that I can't really control, because I can't control my anxiety. I can't control when the teacher's going to call on me. There's a bunch of things that I, feel I can't control. But if I at least say to myself, okay, I'm going to raise my hand and I'm going to be the first one to say something. And it can be as simple as, my name is so and so, and I like watching anime and whatever, like one or two things. Um, and what I have found is I started doing that and it just started getting easier, right? So it was really, really difficult the first couple of times. And it's really important to just, for me at least, just push through that discomfort. I think that's part of what's most difficult when it comes to anxiety, especially social anxiety, is pushing through that initial discomfort and just doing it anyway, doing what you have to do anyway, even if you find that you're going to stumble and hesitate and stumble over your words, and that you're going to be like me and turn like a tomato, and maybe you're going to sound dumb. That's one of the things that I um, is prominent to me is sometimes I say things and like my own internal voice, right? Like I'll feel like, what the heck am I even saying? Like I sound like an idiot right now. Um, Knowing that all of that is probably going to happen, and then just pushing myself to do what I have to do through the discomfort, um, is really what has helped me. So, starting with something like being the first one to volunteer, or if this is too difficult, which it might be, everyone's at different levels. Um, if making an order over the phone or even through a drive-through over a drive-through is difficult for you, try starting there, right? Make it a goal for yourself. Okay, this week I'm gonna drive by Starbucks, or I'm gonna call and I make an order at Domino's. Doing one thing that you might be uncomfortable with, but that you feel is still kind of attainable, and then working your way up from there. And then if you don't do it, like you chicken out, you decide at the end, I couldn't do it. Don't beat yourself up over it. That's like another one of the most important lessons that I've learned that I'm still trying to remember and constantly have to tell myself to practice that self compassion, right? Because if we're constantly beating ourselves up over what we did wrong or what we couldn't do, that just adds to like the lack of confidence and the anxiety overall. So, yeah. Once I got comfortable with volunteering to be the first one to speak, I started to volunteer to be the first one to um, do presentations. So whenever I had a project or a presentation due, and I found that the professors or the teachers, um, I think will grade easier if you're the first one to present because they don't have anybody else to compare you to when they're watching your presentation because you're the first one to go. And I've also found that by being the first one to volunteer, to either answer a question or present, it lessens the amount of times that I get called on randomly in class because um, a lot of times teachers and professors I think will call on people who don't talk very often in class or tend to keep to themselves, which was me for a lot of the time. But when I started to kind of take that power back and being like, okay, I'm going to be the first one to talk, or I'm going to be the first one to answer a question at the beginning of class, and then they just didn't call on me for the rest of the class. So that in itself helped lessen the anxiety because there wasn't that expectation of I'm going to be called on because I already spoke. So there's that. And then once I was able to do that and kind of practice that, I um, put myself in situations that were even more difficult. So I have kind of been taking myself through exposure therapy, right? Um, Slowly. And uh, in community college, I took a piano class. So where I knew that at the end of the semester, I had to perform in a recital. So I learned For Elise by Beethoven and was expected to play that song in the auditorium in front of other students and other people who attended the recital, which was in itself pretty terrifying. I'm not gonna lie. Like my hands were shaking. I was trembling the entire time, but I did it. I messed up a couple of times, but I think I ended up with a B in that class. So it wasn't too bad. So it was kind of really scary, right? But again, I pushed myself past the discomfort and kind of did it anyway. Um, and then from the recital class, I moved on to like a choir and singing class. Somewhere along the way, I do remember I had a little bit of a panic attack and had to. Uh, um, it was like I think in the middle of a choir performance. I had to get off the stage, and I ran to the bathroom because I was hyperventilating and having a very hard time breathing. Um, and my professor kind of talked to me about it, and I told her, look, I deal with anxiety, and I have been putting myself through exposure therapy little by little, and sometimes it goes well and sometimes it doesn't, and I was panicking, right? So know that even when you try things, it's not always going to go perfectly. And she kind of commanded me for it. And she said, that's very brave of you. And I'm glad to have you in this class and just keep pushing forward. Um, and I am on medication too. I take antidepressants, and some of those antidepressants also help with anxiety. Um, Although I really haven't found a medication that works well for me, and that's why you'll find in my channel that I've reviewed a bunch of different medications. Um, but once I made it past like the whole piano recital and the choir and the singing, I interviewed for my first job, and that was when I was like 30, like 31, 32. So it was fairly recently, um, because up to now I've mostly worked online, uh, like selling things on Etsy and custom t-shirts. I'm a graphic designer. I interviewed online for a part-time reading specialist job. So I have tutored in the past, but this was like my first real job. And it required me to go to people's homes and tutor their kids an hour to an hour and a half daily, 2 to 3 times a week. And sometimes we would meet in their home, or sometimes parents would choose to meet in a public place like a library. Either way, that requires social interaction, right? So I never had a problem interacting with kids. I've always been great with kids. It's the adults that I struggle with. So this was a big step for me because I did have to introduce myself to the parents, like talk to them, answer any questions that they had about like their kids' progress with the reading program and everything. Um, I got the job and I started going to people's houses and doing that. And um, there was a level of anxiety that always kind of emerged right when I had to go to like a new home. But I just kind of again pushed through the discomfort so that I could do what I had to do. And then more recently, I finally threw myself into a full-time job as a speech therapist, which is what I'm going to school for, which is my career goal. And this by far has been the most difficult challenge and the most difficult thing that I've had to deal with as far as the anxiety goes, because I have to meet with parents. I have meetings with parents and vice principals and psychologists and the whole IEP team. Um, Sometimes it's several meetings a week to go over the kids' progress, to present my piece in a room full of other professionals and the kid's parent, and also constantly reaching out to them via phone, like telephone, to schedule meetings, and um, meeting with my supervisor. Um, it's been difficult, but I like the first couple of weeks I would get home and I would have with a killer migraine and come home and just throw up, just puke my guts out. And I have a whole video about that process and how that adjustment period went to having a full-time job where I have to interact with people on a daily basis and have meetings several times a week, and how that is, you know, and how that works for someone like me who has all of these conditions like anxiety, social anxiety, depression, ADHD, cerebral palsy. And another thing is being as open as you possibly can, as open as you feel comfortable being with your teachers, professors, and your supervisors and the people around you that you work with. Um, so, whatever that looks like for you. Maybe you want to send out an email to one of your supervisors or your teachers and be like, look, I struggle with these conditions. I deal with anxiety, social anxiety, whatever. I just want to let you know that sometimes it may be difficult for me to participate. Um, and I have been super, super open with the people that I've worked with my supervisors and with my current supervisor, right? And I don't just bring it up out of the blue most of the time. I just kind of find a place or a time to talk about it. Like, um, I remember she asked me, like, oh, well, how are you feeling? How are your first couple of months of being a speech therapist? How do you like it? Is there anything that you feel that you need help with? And it helps, of course, to have a supportive um, environment, whether that's a work environment or school environment. And that's when I said to her, well, I was really, really dreading going to my first IEP meeting because I have social anxiety, and that's something that I've always kind of struggled with. And the first one was really, really rough, but with repeated exposure, and just constantly having to go through these meetings, I think it's gotten a little bit easier. And she was really understanding, and she was like, "Oh, you know what? I've dealt with some social anxiety myself, but you get to the point, I've been doing this for so many years, and you get to the point where it's like you don't even have the time to be anxious. It just going to meetings just becomes the norm because you have to do it so often. And so that kind of, you know, um, that exposure will desensitize some of that anxiety. And I have found it to be true, right? Having been exposed to constant meetings and interactions. So, yeah, just being open and honest whenever you can and however you can. It hasn't been easy, but the best advice I can give you guys is to try to do something that makes you uncomfortable and push through the discomfort and push through the awkwardness and just do it anyway. And then be proud of yourself when you do it. And then when you don't, when it fails, still be proud of yourself because you at least tried. And again, consistently expose yourself to these things that make you uncomfortable, even if they're little things, and then try to work your way up from there. I feel like that's really helped me. Not that it's cured me, but at least it's made it so that now I have a job and I can go out and function for the most part, despite the social anxiety.